The bank was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of silence that feels heavy like the air itself is holding its breath. I stood in front of the counter, clutching the worn-out piece of paper in my sweaty hand. The teller, a young woman with glasses slipping down her nose, looked from me to the check, then back to me again, her eyebrows furrowed. Where did you get this? She asked softly. I swallowed hard. My grandfather gave it to me. Her expression changed something between confusion and curiosity. She called for the manager. I could see the other customers turning their heads, whispering, wondering what was happening. I felt heat rising up my neck. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd done something terrible, maybe the check really was fake, maybe I was in trouble. When the manager came out, his face was stern, his suit too tight for the African heat. He took one look at the check, then at me, then back at the paper again. His lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't say a word. He simply nodded and told me to wait. Then he disappeared into his office, the check in his hand. As I stood there, heart thudding, my mind raced back to yesterday. Grandpa had called me into the living room after lunch. He was sitting in his favorite chair by the window, sunlight spilling on his wrinkled face. He had that mischievous smile again, the one that meant he was planning something. Come, my child, he said, holding out an envelope. I have something for you. I took it carefully, expecting maybe a letter or a story, but when I opened it, my breath caught. It was a check, real paper, printed with the bank's name, even had a signature and watermark, but the number written on it made my eyes widen. 1 million naira. I looked at him in shock. Grandpa, is this real? He laughed so hard that even my parents came running from the kitchen. Oh, he gave you one of his jokes again, my mother said, shaking her head. My father chuckled, slapping Grandpa gently on the shoulder. Papa, what kind of prank is this? He said. Grandpa only smiled, a small joke to remind him that sometimes the impossible just needs courage to test it. Everyone laughed. Even I forced a smile, but inside, I wasn't sure. The check looked real. The ink, the signature, everything. But Grandpa was known for his tricks once. He'd sold my uncle a magic walking stick. That turned out to be an old broom handle. Still, when I looked at him that day, something in his eyes wasn't joking. There was a twinkle. Yes, but also a kind of knowing. A challenge. Before going to bed that night, I pulled the check out again. I held it under the lantern light and traced the signature with my finger. Maybe I should just see what happens, I whispered to myself. Standing in that bank with the manager gone and everyone staring, I wasn't sure if I'd made a huge mistake or stumbled into something bigger than a joke. The teller looked nervous when the manager finally reappeared. He didn't look angry. In fact, he looked almost surprised. He walked up to me slowly, holding the check carefully like it was fragile glass. You said your grandfather gave you this? He asked quietly. Yes, sir. He looked at me for a long moment, then said something that made my stomach flip. I think I know this handwriting. The manager's voice carried a strange tone, a mix of surprise and memory. He stared at the check as though it had come from another lifetime. Your grandfather's name? He asked. Mr. Juma, I said quietly. Jumalik. His eyes widened slightly. Then he let out a soft whistle. Ah, he murmured. Old man Juma. I remember him. Everyone in this town knew that name once. He gestured for me to follow. My heart raced as I walked behind him through the narrow hallway, my slippers tapping softly on the tiled floor. The air smelled faintly of dust and old paper. He opened a small office door, and the moment we stepped in, he locked it behind us. I froze. Don't be afraid, he said, pulling out a drawer. This is strange, very strange. He rummaged through a pile of brown files until he found one marked with faded ink. Juma Leak Legacy Account. My breath caught again. He placed the file gently on the desk, opened it, and began flipping through the yellowed papers. His face grew more serious with each page. Finally, he looked up. This check, he said, holding it beside the papers, isn't fake. At least, not completely. The signature matches your grandfather's. The account number is old, but it's real, very old. This bank branch was partly founded by him. Did you know that? I shook my head slowly, trying to take it all in. Grandpa never told me that. He just told stories about how he used to count coins and give people advice. The manager smiled faintly. He wasn't lying. He was a teller here when this bank was still called Federal Trust of Ibadan. He was known for his humor, but also his wisdom. And he did something strange before he retired. He opened a small savings account under a family legacy fund. Then he disappeared from our records. My eyes fell to the file. So, this check. He leaned back. I can't explain it yet. It's written on an old checkbook style that hasn't been printed in decades. But this handwriting, he lifted the paper to the light, it's definitely his. My pulse quickened. Does that mean there's money? He chuckled softly. Perhaps. But more than that, there's history. I'll need to verify the account in our archives. You may want to come back tomorrow. I nodded numbly, still trying to understand. As he escorted me back to the main lobby, people stared, whispering again. I felt both proud and scared. My heart thumped in rhythm with every step I took out of the bank. Outside, the hot afternoon sun blinded me. The street was busy, vendors shouting, motorcycles zooming by, children laughing, but everything felt distant. I kept replaying his words. Old man legacy account. When I reached home, Grandpa was sitting under the mango tree, peeling oranges with his pocket knife. He looked up at me and smiled that same knowing smile. Ah, my little banker has returned, he said, eyes twinkling. Tell me, did they laugh at you too? I hesitated, watching him closely. No, I said slowly. They didn't laugh. They remembered you. He chuckled softly, tossing me a slice of orange. Good, he said. Then the game has begun. That night, I couldn't sleep. Grandpa's words. Then the game has begun, kept echoing in my head like a drumbeat. What game? What was he planning? I lay awake listening to the crickets outside, the hum of the night, and the faint sound of Grandpa's cough from his room. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but a part of me was afraid. He had that mysterious way of speaking, like every sentence hid a riddle. At dawn, I got up before anyone else. The sky was painted in pale orange light, and mist hugged the ground like a blanket. I could hear Grandpa already outside feeding his chickens. I walked up to him quietly. Grandpa, I said, what did you mean yesterday about the game? He chuckled softly without looking up. Ah, you're still thinking about that check, eh? Good. Curiosity is a seed. Let it grow. But Grandpa, the manager said your name is still in their records. There's a legacy account. Did you know? He looked at me finally, eyes glinting beneath his wrinkled brow. Of course, I knew. Every wise man keeps something for the future. But tell me, child, why do you think I gave you that check? Not your father, not your mother. I hesitated. I don't know. Because, he said, leaning closer, you still believe in impossible things. The others stopped believing long ago. He turned away and walked toward the house, leaving me frozen in place. The morning light catching the edges of his gray hair. That day, I couldn't focus on anything. My parents thought the bank visit had ended the joke, but for me, it had only just begun. I kept replaying the bank manager's face, the way he looked at that old paper like it was a ghost from the past. After dinner, I made up my mind. I would go back to the bank the next day, even if Grandpa didn't ask me to. Something deep inside me told me there was more to this than a prank. Before bed, I checked the envelope again. The check was still there, slightly crumpled but strangely dignified, like an old relic. And there, in the corner of the paper, I noticed something I hadn't before. Faint initials written in pencil, L.J., Leak Juma. It wasn't just a check. It was signed twice, once for the money, once for the message. The next morning, I woke up early again. Grandpa was sitting on the veranda, sipping his tea slowly, staring at the rising sun. He looked at me, and before I could even speak, he said, "You're going back, aren't you?" I nodded. "I just need to know." He smiled, not surprised at all. "Then go. But remember, every truth has a price. Be ready to pay it." As I walked toward the dusty main road that led to the town, I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. The check in my pocket seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. I didn't know what awaited me at the bank, but I could feel it. The story wasn't about money anymore. It was about something Grandpa had buried in time, waiting for me to uncover. The bank looked different that morning. Maybe it was the sunlight bouncing off the glass doors. Or maybe it was me walking in, not as a nervous boy, but as someone chasing a mystery. I gripped the check in my pocket, feeling its edges through the fabric like a heartbeat guiding me forward. The teller from yesterday noticed me immediately. She smiled faintly, half curious, half amused. "You came back," she said. "Yes," I replied. "The manager asked me to." She nodded and disappeared into the back room. A few moments later, the manager appeared, holding a folder that looked even older than yesterday's one. "Ah, young Mr. Leak," he said with a polite smile. "Come in, I've found something." My stomach flipped. I followed him again through the narrow hallway, into his small, dusty office. He laid the folder on the table, the brown paper tied with string. As he untied it, a faint smell of old ink and time filled the room. Last night, he began, I checked our archives. This account was opened in 1974, under your grandfather's name. He deposited only a small sum, but the interesting part is this note written beside it. He turned the paper around for me to read. The handwriting was neat. Unmistakably Grandpa's, for the child who dares to believe in what others laugh at. I blinked. He wrote that. The manager nodded slowly, and he instructed the bank to keep the account active, even if dormant, until claimed by a direct descendant who presents one of his personal checks. My breath caught. That's this check, exactly. The manager leaned back. Your grandfather was a clever man. I've seen many things in my career, but never something like this. It's as if he predicted you'd come. I didn't know what to say. My heart pounded in disbelief. The manager continued, flipping through the last few pages. The interest accumulated over decades. It's not a fortune, but it's more than enough to make a difference, around 2 million naira today. 2 million? I stared at the figure, barely able to breathe. He planned all this. The manager smiled faintly. Some men leave land, others leave houses. Your grandfather left you a lesson. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I thought of Grandpa sitting under the mango tree, peeling oranges, his laughter echoing through the house. He had played a joke, yes, but behind it, he had built a bridge between generations. The manager signed a few forms and handed me a document to take home. You'll need your parents' signatures to process this officially, he said kindly. But, my boy, tell your grandfather from me that his trick was pure genius. I walked out of the office in a daze. The bright afternoon sun felt different this time, warmer, alive. Every sound on the street, every color around me seemed sharper, louder, as I made my way home. One thought burned in my mind. Grandpa hadn't given me a fake check. He had given me a test. When I got home, Grandpa was right where I expected him, under the mango tree, his old radio humming quietly beside him. He looked up as I approached, that same twinkle in his eyes. Ah, he said, the banker returns again. Did you finally cash my fortune? I didn't answer immediately. I just stood there, staring at him, still holding the folder the manager gave me. Grandpa, I said finally, my voice trembling, you knew everything, didn't you? The account, the note, everything. He laughed softly, a deep, dry sound that came from years of laughter and wisdom. My boy, I didn't know. I believed. There's a difference. I sat down beside him, the dust rising around us. The manager said you opened that account in 1974. You left a note saying it was for the child. Who dares to believe? Why me, Grandpa? Why not Papa? He sliced another orange, handed me a piece, and said, because your father stopped believing in magic the day he became a man. You still dream. You still ask questions. You still see gold where others see dust. His words hit me harder than I expected. I looked down at the orange slice in my hand, the juice dripping down my fingers, and suddenly everything made sense. The jokes, the riddles, the fake check, even his laughter. It wasn't about the money. It was about the lesson. But Grandpa, I said, trying to smile, you could have just told me. He grinned. And ruin the fun. No, my child. Lessons that are handed to you are forgotten. Lessons you hunt for stay forever. The wind blew softly, rustling the mango leaves above us. I could hear my mother in the kitchen, humming as she cooked, and my father fixing the gate. Everything felt whole. Do you know what I really wanted to give you? Grandpa asked suddenly. What? He pointed to his head, then to his heart. Courage to think, and faith to feel. You see, the world will hand you many fake checks, promises that seem worthless, dreams that look foolish. But the wise ones, they cash them anyway. I smiled, though my eyes stung. You really are a tricky man. He laughed again. That's what keeps the young ones learning. We sat in silence for a while, the sun dipping lower, painting the sky in gold. I told him about the bank manager, about how he remembered Grandpa's name, how impressed he was by the plan. Grandpa listened, nodding slowly, his eyes distant like he was watching an old movie in his mind. Then, quietly, he said, good. Then my circle is closing. The seed has grown. I frowned. What do you mean? He just smiled, looking up at the sunset. You'll understand soon enough. My child, every story must end, but some endings are just doors to another tale. For a moment, I didn't understand, but the way his voice softened, the way his eyes lingered on the horizon, I felt it. Something was changing. The next few weeks passed quietly, yet something in the air felt different, heavier somehow. Grandpa still told his stories in the evenings, still laughed his thunderous laugh, but there was a slowness in his movements now. He coughed more often, And sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, he'd stare off into the distance, as though watching something none of us could see. I tried to ignore it, but deep down, I knew what was happening. His body was growing weaker, but his spirit seemed stronger than ever. He spent most mornings under the mango tree, his radio beside him, and his notebook open, pages filled with tiny notes, memories, and bits of advice written in his neat handwriting. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the sky, he called me over. His voice was softer than usual, but still carried that teasing tone I loved. "Come, my young banker," he said, patting the bench beside him. "It's time for your final lesson." I smiled weakly. "Final? You make it sound like school." He chuckled, then coughed lightly. "Life is a school, my boy. You only stop learning when the bell stops ringing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out another envelope, old and wrinkled, just like the first one. My heart skipped. "Not another check, Grandpa," I said, half laughing, half afraid. He grinned. "Open it." I tore it open carefully. Inside was a blank piece of paper. Nothing written, no numbers, no ink, just emptiness. "Grandpa, there's nothing here." He nodded slowly. "Exactly, that's the point. You don't need paper to be rich anymore. You already hold everything that matters: courage, wisdom, curiosity." He leaned back, his eyes glimmering in the fading light. "I just wanted to see if you'd open it without fear." "You did." I felt tears pricking behind my eyes. "You're not leaving yet, are you?" He smiled gently. "Leaving? No. I'm just changing seats. Every story needs someone new to tell it. You'll do that now." I looked away, trying to hold back the emotion burning in my chest. The old man who had once tricked everyone with his laughter was now quietly handing me his legacy. He looked up at the sky again. "Remember, child, the world will laugh at your dreams. Let them. Then turn those laughs into echoes of your success. That is how you cash life's fake checks." His words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. The air smelled of dust and mango leaves. And for a moment, I wished time could stop right there. Later that night, I found the blank paper still on my table. I ran my fingers across it and thought maybe it wasn't blank at all. Maybe it was waiting for me to write my story on it. A week later, Grandpa's cough got worse. The doctor said it was his heart. He spent his last days in peace, always smiling, always telling me stories, as if he wanted to empty his soul before it drifted away. On his final night, he whispered, "Keep cashing the checks life gives you, my boy, even the fake ones." And then he closed his eyes, still smiling. The house felt empty after Grandpa's passing. Like the laughter had been packed up and carried away with him. Even the mango tree seemed quieter. The chickens he used to feed wandered around, confused, as though waiting for him to return. My mother cried every night, and my father spoke less. But for me, the silence wasn't just grief, it was the weight of his last words pressing against my heart. After the funeral, the elders of the village came to pay their respects. They told stories about Grandpa, how he once helped a farmer escape debt by teaching him to trade wisely, how he'd built benches for the local school, and how he'd never refused anyone in need. Everyone had a story about Jumalik, and every story ended with laughter. A week later, while helping my father sort through Grandpa's old belongings, I found his leather notebook. Its pages were filled with his handwriting, small, deliberate, each word carefully chosen. On the last page, written faintly in pencil, were the words, "The world laughs at dreamers until those dreams start feeding the world." I traced the words slowly, feeling tears build in my eyes. Grandpa's wisdom wasn't gone. It was everywhere, in his stories, his notes, even in the air around our home. That same evening, my father called me into the living room. The folder from the bank sat on the table. He sighed deeply before speaking. "Your grandfather's account. It's officially transferred to your name now." The bank confirmed everything. I nodded quietly. "It's not about the money, Papa." He looked at me for a long time, then smiled softly. "I know, but your grandfather would want you to do something meaningful with it, not just spend it, grow it." Those words planted a seed in my heart. In the following weeks, I began to plan. The school in our village often struggled. No proper library. No computers, sometimes not even enough books for the students. Grandpa had always said education was the most valuable currency. So I made a decision. I took part of the money and worked with the headmaster to build a small reading center, the Juma Legacy Library. We filled it with donated books, old typewriters, and a single computer that became the pride of the school. When the library finally opened, children from nearby villages came to see it. Some called it the House of Stories. I stood outside that day, looking up at the painted sign with Grandpa's name, and I swear I could almost hear his laugh in the wind. At night, I placed the framed fake check beside his old photo. The check that started as a joke now hung as a symbol, proof that even a prank, born from love and wisdom, could change lives. I whispered to his picture. "You were right, Grandpa. The fake check turned out to be the real treasure." And for the first time since his passing, I smiled, not out of sadness, but out of pride, because I finally understood the lesson completely. Years passed, but Grandpa's story never faded. The fake check that once made everyone laugh had become a legend in our town, a story parents told their children about belief, curiosity, and courage. The Juma Legacy Library grew larger, volunteers added more books, and young students from nearby villages came every weekend to read. Each time I watched them flipping through pages with wide eyes, I felt Grandpa's spirit somewhere in the laughter, the learning, and the dreams that filled those rooms. I had grown older, no longer the shy boy clutching a wrinkled check, but a young man with purpose. The lessons Grandpa left behind shaped every step I took. Whenever challenges came, financial troubles, self-doubt or failure, I'd remember his words. Life will hand you fake checks every day. Cash them anyway. Sometimes, when the evenings were quiet, I'd sit under that same mango tree where he once sat, the same spot where everything began. The radio was long gone, but I'd play soft music on my phone and imagine him beside me, tapping his feet, peeling an orange, smiling that mischievous smile. One day, a journalist from a local newspaper came to the village. She had heard about the library and the strange story behind it. She asked me to tell her everything, how a fake check became the seed of something so real. When I finished recounting the tale, she looked at me thoughtfully and said, "Your grandfather must have been a genius." I smiled. He was more than that. He was a teacher who used laughter as his chalk. The article went viral online. People from across the country sent messages, some donating books, others saying they were inspired to start projects of their own. A businessman even offered scholarships to our brightest students. It was as if Grandpa's lesson had traveled beyond the grave, whispering to people far away, believe in the impossible. One evening, I returned home to find my mother sitting near Grandpa's photo. She was smiling softly, her eyes moist. "He'd be so proud of you," she said. I looked at the framed check hanging above the mantel. Its ink had faded slightly, but the story behind it glowed brighter than ever. "He already is," I said quietly. "He knew all along this was never about the money." That night, I wrote in my journal, something Grandpa once told me to do when I was young. I wrote, "The real treasure was never in the bank, it was in the lesson." He made me chase a joke, only to teach me how to chase my dreams. I closed the book and smiled. The moonlight spilled through the window, touching the photo on the wall, and for a brief second, I could almost hear Grandpa's voice, playful as ever. "Now that, my boy, is a check well cashed?" The room felt lighter. The air was filled with peace, the kind that comes when a story ends the way it was meant to. Because, in truth, the check was never fake. It was faith written in ink.